All right, good afternoon and good morning and good evening, everyone. This is the 60-second Fireside Chat coming to you from a lot of countries around the world. Pleased to have everyone here today. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to start with Frank, as Frank had not a chance to ask a question the last time he was on. That one got set aside. So please go ahead, Frank.
Thank you, Donna. Hey, Tom. Great to talk to you again.
Hi, Frank.
So you've often said that we have the free will to decide whether we want to play another experience packet in a PMR-style virtual reality. But we almost always decide to do that because sooner or later, after our last experience packet, our IUOC gets bored hanging out in PMR and thus decides to play another round in the PMR game. On the other hand, I think you've said that some other entities just hang out in PMR. They're not interested in joining a PMR. So I wonder, why are they not bored? What are they doing all day long that would seem boring to us? What else is there to do in NPMR?
Well, if you've never been in a virtual reality like PMR, then you don't realize how boring what you are in is. So for those who have never been in a virtual reality, to them, that's just the way life is. And they just, they do what they do, but it's a very, very slow track compared to being in a PMR. So, but they don't realize it because they've never had that experience. They've never had the contrast. So they don't really notice that much. So yes, I've run into entities who have had no association with PMRs. They've just been out there, but they don't evolve very quickly. They they don't have consequences. Now, it's not so much that none of them have consequences in any sense. Sometimes there's groupings and they have interactions between them, but it's more like interactions in a dream, what we would call a dream space, where the rule set is not very strong rule set. So they do have interactions with others and so on, but it just doesn't have the consequences that it has here. But over time, they can evolve. It's not that that's an impossible place to evolve. It's just a slow track. It doesn't challenge you nor give you the consequences that almost everything you say and do here has consequences. Unless you say and do it by yourself, in a closet, then there's very few consequences. But if you're interacting with other people, most everything you say, most everything you do as you interact with other people has consequences outside of you. And that's not true if you're in a dream reality, kind of still a rule set, but just a very minimal rule set. So they don't notice that they're bored. They're not bored because they've never been to a place that was a lot faster. Sort of like people who live in a big city. If you know people who spent all their life in a big city and then they go to live out in the country someplace, they have a similar sort of thing. They go out into the country, and after about 6 months or a year of that, they're wondering what to do. They feel not stimulated. They feel like life is too slow. So it's a similar sort of thing. It's what you get used to. If you're used to that slow life, you go to the big city and life is way too fast and too much is happening all at the same time, and it gets confusing, and you realize that most of it is very shallow and doesn't have much meaning, and you want to go back to the country. It's kind of what you get used to is what you like, and that's the way it is with them.
So basically, the virtual reality like ours is where all the action is, right? So it's kind of because sometimes when we describe it as a learning lab or a tool for us, it looks like it's just a tool to achieve something bigger or to do something else afterwards. Or when it's likened to a flight simulator, for example, then, a real flight simulator, once you've learned flying, then you go out and you go somewhere else to fly a real plane. But that's maybe where the metaphor here breaks down, because, what PMR is a learning lab, but it's actually the place to be, even for, so for I don't know how many times. And I've been thinking about that. And actually that really puts more value into into PMR, like how that we should really make it beautiful and maintain it and not, you know, screw up the planet and everything we do here, like Beethoven's symphony, it was composed once, but if we don't destroy the planet, it's gonna make this place beautiful for forever almost. So there is a lot. It's not just a tool here, a learning lab, but it's a purpose in itself, right?
Exactly. You're exactly right. So yeah, the metaphor of the flight trainer is limited. Although you could say that there are dozens of flight type programs out there, virtual realities, and you'd like to go get into a flight trainer that just has you practice flying, so that when you get into these other virtual realities, you'd be more competent at flying a vehicle. You know, you might say that, but it's really even more than that. As you say, it's a way of life. It's a way of being. It's not just an experience to go have that helps you go do something else. It's an experience to go have that helps you be, that helps you evolve, that helps you, you know, in your purpose. So it's not, just a thing we do for a while. It's our life. And it's so just that we can learn faster here than we can not here.
And when we've learned really a lot here, then what do we do next? Do we go out and help build other flight simulators and other learning labs, or we can join the administration, or
all of those are possible?
Really just go back again and again to help other people within this virtual reality?
Yeah, the answer is all of the above. You know, wherever you're most needed, wherever, in whatever situation provides you with the greatest opportunity for growing and with the greatest opportunity to help other people grow. So the growth thing is the lowering entropy. That's the prime mover. That's the cause. And it's what we're trying to accomplish. That's the goal. And however you can best do that requires you to work both on yourself and help others, because you get more helpful to others the more that you grow up yourself. If you're not very grown up, you're pretty limited in what you can do to help others. So you constantly have this dual mission to grow yourself and to help others grow themselves. And if you can do that best by just coming back here, then that's what you can do. Or you can go to some other virtual reality, some other PMR, and you can work there because maybe they have a greater need than here. Or, you know, you might do something else, right? You may envision a different kind of PMR and, you know, start a whole new project, you know, in a different way. So I don't think there's really any limitations. The only limitation is that the long-term end product needs to be lower entropy. Anything you can imagine, anything you can create, or anything you can put yourself in that aids that goal, then it's open to you. You can go do that.
And because evolution is open-ended, there are things that, I mean, we as normal humans anyway, we can't imagine, but even very evolved beings cannot imagine, because you never know what the whole product can be in the end, right? Exactly.
When you get, well, just us in this virtual reality in this particular planet, there's 7.5 billion of us. You get 7.5 billion people, all with free will, and what are all the possible outcomes of that? You know, it's, you know, if you just do the math of it, if you have 7.5 billion independent things all interacting, what are the number of possibilities of interactions? You see, it's so huge that it's mind-boggling. You can't even think about what that might be. But now you have a system that's got multiple PMRs and multiple processes and processes outside of PMRs. And if you mix all of that up, what's the potential of that system? It's, you know, I won't say it's infinite, because infinity isn't a real thing, but it's about as close to infinite, I guess, as we can imagine. So yes, it's open-ended. The system will just keep evolving, and you know, one might think that, well, eventually perhaps you'd get to the point where it had evolved to where there weren't any new spaces to get into. Theoretically, that would be the case. You know, there's nothing, you know, if you keep lowering your entropy, you'll get to a point where it's harder and harder to find more entropy to lower. But that boundary is so far away that it really doesn't deserve a whole lot of thinking. And the point is, if that's the case, this particular virtual reality got to the point that it wasn't real useful anymore, then you'd make a different virtual reality with a different kind of rule sets and different kinds of interactions that would be more useful. So, you know, in that way, it is a tool that suits where we are now as individuated units of consciousness. It's a tool that suits us. If we outgrow this tool, I'm sure we will have generated new tools that will suit us better. But it's hard to think of running out of potential. That's almost unimaginable given the fact that all of these people have free will. Because even though sometimes people grow up and lower their entropy, sometimes after that they'll turn around and increase their entropy for a while too. It just happens. So it's not like it's a monolithic, monotonic increase, that the entropy for everybody is always decreasing, you know, all the time, and we're going to get to a point where we can't decrease it anymore. There's those evolving in a positive direction, those evolving in a negative direction, and most everybody in between is bumping up and down between those two. You know, we take a couple of steps forward and a couple of steps backward, and sometimes we take a whole lot of steps backward before we get back and taking steps forward again. It's just the nature of the game. So it's a slow process of us growing up. So I don't see that we're going to run out of options anytime soon.
And just as a last thing that I would like to say, so even if the whole thing is evolved and evolved much farther than we can imagine right now, but it will not merge all back into one thing. So the MBT model is not like some other spiritual models, like it's not cyclical, that it evolves to the point that it's exploited all the options, and that's almost like, you know, the beginning, and then it goes back. So it's not it's not cyclical, right?
No, it's not a cycle like that at all. You see, it started out as one monolithic thing, and it found that to be very limiting. No matter how evolved that monolithic thing is, a monolithic thing is very limiting. You've only got one free will making choices. You know, that's a very limited system. So you don't want to go back toward that system. It's not that everybody, all the IUOCs are going to grow up and return to the Godhead and become one with, you know, with Aum, and now we're all done. Well, now we're back to where we started. Well, we may be a level up or two from where we started, but we're still back at the same problem. Wherever it is you are, you can do better if you're a monolithic thing by breaking into subsets of yourself and interacting with them. See, so it's not really cyclical in the sense that we grow up and then we return and disappear. You know, we are individuated units of consciousness, and as such, we remain. We remain that. Now, as free will awareness units, we do not remain. If you're a free will awareness unit, when your avatar dies, then the free will awareness unit just gets reabsorbed and no longer is an independent thing. It's gone. Well, you know, that's not really cyclical either. That's just a temporary partition of some of the IUOC that, you know, once its job's over, then it just goes back into the labor pool, if you like, and, you know, gets another job once that job's over. And so, no, we don't. Our purpose isn't to merge. Our purpose is to emulate, not merge. So we would like to grow up to as much as we can. And the LCS has been working on that, growing up a lot longer than we have. And it's probably bigger and brighter and smarter than we are too. So it's further ahead on this progression, but it's still progressing as well. It's still progressing. So we're trying to be all we can be, which is we'd like to be like the LCS. Well, by the time we get there, the LCS will probably be something else, you see. So it's emulation is what we're doing. We're emulating that source, not trying to end ourselves in it or merge with it or become it. I think there's a kind of an emotional satisfaction in finding things in cycles. It's like, you know, you know, you have the beginning and you have the ending, and it's all kind of neatly packaged. But evolution isn't like that. Evolution is not a neat package. Evolution is open-ended, and it just evolves and goes wherever it can go, however it goes there. And that's different. So it's not as, I don't know, warm and cuddly a concept as one that's in a cycle. Cycle's kind of all neat and pat and self-contained, if you will. But evolution is not. Evolution just chugs on. And the next state that it gets to is dependent on the last state that it got to. So there's really lots and lots of unexplored states. Because had the last state been different, then the new state would have been different. So there's lots of space that we don't even explore. We just explore down a thread of our own choices. That's just one thread. So it takes us a long, at that one thread level, it's going to take us a long time to explore, you know, all the things we need to explore as IUOCs.
Thank you.
We have a new participant today, Nathalie. Welcome to the Fireside Chat, and please go ahead with your question.
Hello. Thank you, Donna. First, I want to say for a short thank you, Thomas Campbell, for writing down your theory and sharing all the stuff for free. It already helped me a lot and yeah, gave me a lot of new viewpoints. And the question I want to ask you is how you think about our relationship to the Earth, and if you see the Earth as a known entity with an individuated consciousness, or is it more like it's just material? And I'd like to understand how it's possible that if you walk mindful through the Earth and go into nature, there can get these high feelings inside of you, and they can make you so free and yeah, lowering your entropy and bring you into love even. So is it a kind of conversation between me or between the human and the Earth, or is it more like just something that is created inside of me?
Okay. All right, I can talk to that. The Earth itself is, it depends on how we define words, but let me try to make the definitions clear. And I would say that the Earth itself is not conscious in the sense that the Earth is constantly making choices. Oh, I'm going to choose to do this. I want to choose to have an ocean over there, and I want to choose to have a volcano erupt over here. It's not that the Earth is making choices like that, but there is a collective consciousness that we can talk about that is a collective of all the conscious things on the Earth. That is something that you can tap into and something that is available. You can connect to everything in that sense. And even things like trees, I think, have an awareness. I wouldn't say they're conscious because I'm not sure yet that they make choices, but they certainly are aware. They are aware of their environment, and they can and let's put it this way, you can sense them and you can interact in some way with that, but they are just as they are, and you can interact with them. But what you mainly feel when you walk in the woods and you feel nature and you just feel the connection and you feel that energy starts pouring into you because you're connected to this outside world. When you feel that, you are largely getting in touch, not with yourself, but with source, with the source, with what I call the larger consciousness system. You're in touch with source, and source basically is everything. See, source is everything. Source can play the part of every blade of grass and every leaf on the tree, you know, and every tree in the forest. So source is there. And as you are open to bigger pictures, as you're open to feeling, you know, to feeling, like I say, things, to be interacting in ways that are non-confrontational, that are not ego-based, you know, you're just open to whatever is. Well, source is there to interact with you. So it's not just yourself. It is something outside of you that you're interacting with. And it is beautiful, and it is grand, and it is still and quiet, and replenishes you with energy. It's got all of those attributes. But, you know, it's because of you that you're able to make that connection. Somebody else can walk in the woods and not see anything other than woods or streams or rocks. And there's nothing there except things for them to use. Oh, I can climb on the rocks, or I could climb up the tree, or I could, you know, chop down a tree and make paper with it, or, you know, they see the natural world as something they can use. And they don't experience what you experience because they don't open themselves to it. So it's partly what you experience is because of the way you are. And being open like that to make that connection, then source connects with you, and connects with you in a way that's very meaningful. And I think you'll find that when you're in that connection to nature, you can ask questions. You can say, you know, well, you know, what should I do next? You know, where is my path, best path forward? This and that. You can ask questions, and you'll get answers. And it's not like you're talking to the trees and the trees are giving you answers, or the rocks are giving you answers. You're connected with source. So the source can talk to you. And, you know, maybe if you have a belief that the trees are all conscious, and that you can have conversations with particular trees, then the source will talk to you as a tree. The source can talk to you, and you know, it can take on the guise, if you will, of that tree to communicate with you, again, to help you grow, to put you in a growing space. So it's not that people who talk to trees or talk to rocks or have personal relationships with crystals or any of it, it's not that those people are just imagining things and it's not real. It's just mostly they're talking to source, and that thing they're using, be it a tree or a rock or a crystal, is just kind of an aid to help them focus their intent at a deeper, more profound level and interact with source at that level. So that's mostly what's going on. But I define consciousness as something that makes free will choices. In other words, you have to make a choice because I could do this or that, and I get to make the choice which one it is. And trees may one day, or at least some trees may one day, fall into that category, because the more we do science, the more we realize how clever trees are, how they interact and communicate with each other and so on. But we don't know yet for sure whether that's just algorithmic. In other words, they do that just because the biology leads them to do that. You know, they've learned to cooperate with fungus and cooperate with other chemicals, and they've got this cooperative thing. Well, you can have cooperative relationship with things that aren't conscious. Things they just interact because that's what their code tells them to do. In other words, it's all hardwired. It's not really choice making, even though it looks like choice making. It's not really choice making. Just like your computer, you can, a computer can give you choices. Computer can ask you questions, but that doesn't mean the computer's conscious. It just means the algorithms are written such that it's interacting with you and giving you choices and making choices itself. It can decide whether or not to show you a spelling correction or not. You know, and that depends on how you set up your inputs that define its algorithms. So it makes choices based on that. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Those feelings you get out there, they're real, and they are connecting to something that's outside of you, and it can be a very beautiful, very fulfilling thing. That does not require all the rocks and bushes to be conscious. That's kind of a metaphor we can use, but it's not necessarily the case. Mostly, I think you're talking to source. Source is all those things. And if you ever get into the state of consciousness where you kind of are one with the source, and that's a state that anybody can get to if they work on it. They can get to a state where they kind of merge with the one temporarily. Often it's a beam of white light, and they just go into it and merge with it. And when you're in that state, you feel that you are all those things. You're every leaf, you're every blade of grass, you're every person, everything, every rock. You are all of it, and you feel all of it. And at the same time, you have no individual identity. You don't see yourself as an individual person. You just see yourself as everything all at once. Okay, so that's kind of a state of having an attitude of being one with everything. And that's something you can learn to experience. I don't know, maybe you've experienced it already. But in a sense, that's what you're doing then. You're talking with source, which is everything.
Thank you very much. That's something I can work with. I understand. Thank you.
And thank you for your question. We'll go next to Jan or Jan. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I also just wanted to say thank you for the work that you've put in, and that you helped so many people to overcome their fear or to see some different perspectives of their life. Especially for me as well, it helped quite a bit through painful times. So my question today is about how strong a global belief system can be and what the influences are. I wrote it down. Just read it. So I thought about the possibility of the people of this world accepting and experiencing the concept of virtual reality, so that they actually knowing it, like not believing but knowing, and with all its causal logical steps. And I thought, is it then possible to change the rule set or the common expectation of things happening, or will the rule set stay the same to encourage specific learning situations? For example, if the majority knows that we live in a computed reality, more things will be possible because of less limitations in healing, communication, manifesting. I would tell an example because in the past, where magical stories were like a common thing to appear, today it's really uncommon. So the belief system changed. It's not really that possible anymore. And maybe in the past, these creatures or these metaphors for specific things were actually real. Like the system was creating it because it was helpful for the people, but today we are not believing in it anymore. And so therefore, it's not in the range of possibilities. But if we are starting to see it again, that it's possible in a larger spectrum, then we might be able to create new, not technologies, but ways of thinking to make possibilities more open. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Yes, okay. You are correct. It does work that way. Now, it's not because the rule set changes. The rule set doesn't change much. It's what basically defines our virtual reality. And the virtual reality, that rule set is necessary to keep the virtual reality stable and working. So the rule set doesn't change so much. But the thing I call the psi uncertainty principle, that's not really a rule set. That's not part of the rule set. That's more company policy. And yes, indeed, that can change. So if you're at a time where the quality of consciousness is generally pretty low, and people understand that they can modify other people's opinions by using their consciousness to, interact with them, or that they can make people sick or make people well, you know, by using their mind to heal. They can make their boss more likely to give them a promotion, you know, if they keep sending their boss that message. Well, where you have low quality people, you really don't want that understanding get around, because it's just going to be abused more than it is going to be used. You want people to have to earn their way there, figure that out on their own, because they're seekers, and they don't really get to the point where they can do that very well until they have grown up a bit, till their quality of consciousness has developed some. So yes, that psi uncertainty principle is a, you know, I say company policy, you know, not really a rule set, and that can change. And as we evolve, then just the opposite will be true. In order to communicate with others telepathically and to heal and do other things will be very common. People will do that just the way we, you know, get up and walk around now. You know, it'll just be part of the way people are. And that will be when we have a quality of consciousness that's positive enough to deal with that, so that the great majority of the people are going to use it, not abuse it. And the abusers will be contained, because there'll be a much greater number of people that are using it positively. Those positive people can contain the abusers, you see. But if you have a vast majority of abusers, the small minority of those that are using it properly can't contain that vast majority of abusers. It doesn't work that way. So when the majority become higher quality, then yes, there'll be a lot more things that can be done that will be commonplace than there are right now. And there are some examples of that. If you go back to the 1800s, there was a big surge in spiritual type thinking back at the time of Theosophy, back at the time of Ledbetter and Blatsky and a whole bunch of others, even Krishnamurti kind of lived back in that period. If you go back then, you will find that there was a big interest in the paranormal then. And they had science people, just like today, would go out, and their science people then were probably more open-minded than they are today, but they would go out and investigate these things. And they found any number of times and places where reputable people had come to investigate, and they found things called ectoplasm. And this ectoplasm was losing out of people and going places and doing things, and, you know, they have photographs of it, and the eyewitness descriptions, and they were into what was the other thing they were doing? Oh, table tipping and table, levitation, where people would sit around and put hands up on a table, and another, the table would go up, and so on. And of course, the general society said that's all bogus, and it's all tricks and wires and dishonest. But there were a group of scientists from various countries that would go around and validate that some of that was indeed true. Well, how come in the 1800s we can have ectoplasm oozing around, and in the 2000s we can't? Well, it's because at that time science was not good enough and adept enough to be able to take that apart and analyze it. Therefore, there was enough uncertainty that would surround it that it was allowable. And because the number of people who would find it credible was small, it didn't really affect the larger population. So that made it okay. Well, today that wouldn't be okay. You see? So now, is there such a thing as ectoplasm? No, not really. That's just a metaphor. In those days, they had the sense that if you were going to affect something, then something had to reach out and touch that thing you affect. This action at a distance hadn't really gotten hold yet. Okay, so they needed something as a medium to go between the person doing it and the thing that was happening. So they came up with a metaphor. They called it ectoplasm because it was non-physical, but sort of physical, sort of non-physical. It was in the physical system, but it was a subtle substance. You know, they call it subtle, which means it's non-physical. You see, so they needed this because of their beliefs. So no, there is no ectoplasm, but did something actually ooze out of people and had pictures taken of it? Yes. The system let all that happen because it was using that metaphor, because that metaphor was useful at that time. You see, to communicate with people, you needed that metaphor. So, yes, all sorts of strange things might happen and have happened that don't happen anymore just because times change. And we change. Our ability to do analysis changes. Our beliefs change. You know, before, everybody went out of body had a silver cord. And that silver cord was like an air hose down to a deep sea diver. It connected them, it connected the non-physical subtle body to the body. And if that cord got broken, oh, well, both of them would surely die because the subtle body wouldn't have any real body to inhabit and the real body wouldn't have a soul anymore. It would go off. So, you know, it was death to both. So that cord was a lifeline. Well, that's because they believed that going out of body, actually something oozed out of the body, that it lived in your head someplace and it oozed out the top of your head. Well, when you have that belief, then you have to see things like silver cords. You see, and oh, they looked at the silver cord and they touched the silver cord and they pulled on the silver cords. They did whatever, you know, that you could do, and those silver cords were real, no doubt. But then you get up to Bob Monroe, you know, in the 1970s, late 1960s and 70s, and that belief that wasn't so strong anymore. We didn't have that belief, so Bob Monroe didn't have a silver cord, and almost all the out of body after that didn't have any silver cords. It was no longer necessary. So the system didn't have to put that in to make it make sense to the people who were doing it. So the system is going to give you a data stream that makes sense to you so you can interpret it. It wouldn't be valuable for the system to give you a data stream that you couldn't interpret. And part of the restrictions on how you interpret things are your beliefs. You know, depending on your beliefs and your fears, that determines how you can interpret things. So the system will give you things that let you interpret, which means it has to take into consideration what your fears and beliefs are when it gives you a data stream. Otherwise, it's not a very good communicator. It's communicating to you in terms that you can't process. And what's the point in that? So yes, there's all sorts of things that may be possible as we change and grow up that are not possible right now. And there are things that have been possible in the past that we no longer see anymore. And we don't do anymore because we now have mass media. We now have, we now have internets. We now have much more sensitive scientific equipment. So a whole lot of things that were workable in the 1800s don't work anymore. Otherwise, they would violate the psi uncertainty principle, and too many low-quality people would learn things that they're not really ready to deal with yet. So this way, we don't try to hide it. I mean, we talk here about all these things, but most of the people who you don't want to know about that and not understand it will never look at a fireside chat because they already know from their beliefs and fears that that's all nonsense. So it just works out fine. The people who are searching, they will find it and they will get it and they will use it and they'll grow up. The people who already know everything aren't searching because they know all that's impossible, so they just ignore it and go the other way. So it works. You don't really have to hide it. It's like the best kept secrets are in plain view. It's just you don't need to go around and sneak around in the shadows. You can be very open, and those who are seeking will find, and those who aren't won't.
Well, yeah, as I thought, it's makes a lot of sense. It's like not visiting, but like meeting other people when you're open and not like when there's psi uncertainty for yourself in regards to other people, then there is more room for them to express themselves fully. I guess that was my experience, at least in the past, where I constantly was getting information about, well, I'm not good enough, and it was not my information, it was more of the other person, and I was inside encouraging and having a good intention towards the other person, who was not self-confident enough, and I felt that, and I was having just that feeling of, you can do this, you're all right, you're fine. And I had an experience in the last 2 years where I was really afraid, and I was constantly looking for other people doing something that is like controlling my environment, if I do it right, or how to do things right to not get in trouble, so to say. Like, and that changed quite a bit because of fear and psychosis and so on. Like, it's a build-up thing.
Yeah.
And
well, just keep in mind that when you say you get things from other people, that what you get from other people is your interpretation of what you get from other people. So
thanks for the reminder. Yeah.
Everything you get from, when you get something and you say, oh, I can really feel that from somebody else, that's your interpretation of what you get.
Based on my experience. Yeah.
Based on your own experience and your own fears and your own beliefs and so on. So we never get we don't get any, we can't turn data into information except taking it in through our own filters. That's the way it is. So another person may send out data, but what you get out of that data has to do with your own interpretation of the data. And that's why as you grow up, everything gets clearer and clearer and easier because those filters get more and more neutral and less biased.
All right. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. That fits well with my experience. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. We're going to determine whether Gary will ask his question on audio. Gary, are you ready?
I am ready, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. You're fine.
Yeah, okay. Then I'll go ahead. Hi, Tom. You often say that infinity is an abstract concept and it's therefore not real, and that since the LCS is real, it is therefore finite. The unreality of infinity is very clearly demonstrated when materialists are unsuccessfully trying to explain the concept of infinite space. From their perspective, if you consider what is at the outermost edge of the cosmos, they either have to say there is no outer edge because space is infinite, or if they try to define the whole cosmos as an actual size, then the question arises, what is at the end? If it's some kind of cosmic wall, what in material terms is behind the wall? Or put another way, what is the expanding universe expanding into? If I'm understanding correctly, MBT explains that in a virtual reality, space is defined by 3 coordinates, x, y, z, and that to create more space simply requires increasing those values.
Yes.
That is beautifully simple and very understandable. However, I find it difficult to understand the same kind of logic when applied to time. In the MBT model, time is real and linear. It defines change by virtue of the before and after state, and without change, everything would be permanently static. However, if time is real, it cannot, by your own definition, be infinite. For me, anyway, it is impossible to imagine a beginning or an end to time, even within the rule set of a virtual reality, as that seems to contradict the process, which is one of the few assumptions of your model. Although RUOCs can evolve and de-evolve, in the larger picture of the LCS, surely the evolution of consciousness, the general trend, can only go in one direction. Indeed, you have previously confirmed this when you have said that consciousness evolution is never done, that logically, conscious can never say, I'm fully evolved, I'm done. So if time is not infinite because it is finite and therefore real, how does MBT explain this, please?
Okay. First of all, with the assumption in MBT, with the assumption that consciousness exists, and with the idea that consciousness is an information system, just defining what consciousness is, and information systems make information and communicate information, then that basic assumption that consciousness exists brings with it several other things, several other logical, what should we say, some other things that have to be included with it, and one of those is time. So if consciousness exists and evolution exists, then time exists and free will exists. If you don't have free will, then conscious choices don't exist. There are no choices. If you don't, if you don't have free will, then a choice isn't a choice, and the choice has no purpose. It just is, and things just are and remain that way forever. So it's kind of the null set that doesn't go anywhere. So in my model, time, where time comes from, or the beginning of time, isn't discussed. It just is. It starts with consciousness and with the idea of evolution, a system that can change itself, will change itself to suit its interior and exterior environments. So that's where the time comes from. And then later on, regular time is produced by just a cell doing a flip-flop between a 1 and a 0, which becomes a metronome. All right, now that defines time that always runs forward, and it's well, I shouldn't say it always runs forward even in the first case, but now it's regular. Okay, you can order things by time at that point. Now when we get to the end point and say that the system, that I don't see any end to it, that theoretically, and I said this the very first question, was that what happens if the system fulfills all of its potential and it can't lower entropy anymore? It's gone as far as it possibly can go. Well, that is some sort of a theoretical point that perhaps the system could get there. We can say that in theory, but in practice, I think that will never happen. Not only are there so many possibilities as to make it very difficult to think that they could ever all be researched, but things are changing all the time. It's not a static system that has a fixed number of possibilities. Every time choices are made, new possibilities spring up. So it generates possibilities as it goes. It generates potential as it goes. When something, when we do something like invent an internet, that changes the potential in social interaction, just goes up immensely, because now people can speak to each other more easily than they could before, more readily. So the potential of what people can do interacting goes way up. So that's typically the way it is. The lower the entropy is, not only is it using up the sense of the possible space that it could grow into, but it's creating new space to grow into itself. It's creating new potential. So I don't want to say that that's infinite. I mean, I could say that using infinity as a metaphor, but my point is that infinity makes a fine metaphor, but it is not an adjective to describe a real thing. So time doesn't go on endlessly, but I don't see any end to, time going on, if that makes sense. So I would agree with you, basically with what you said. We don't see a beginning of time, it just is. We don't see a beginning to consciousness, that just is, because from inside where we are, that is information that's outside of our system, and it's just beyond our ability to reach that kind of information. That doesn't mean that you have to have some kind of infinite regression, a cause and cause and cause. That doesn't make any sense either. You just have to stop at the point that says, I don't know, because it's outside the space that I can work in. It's outside the consciousness system. It precedes consciousness. It precedes evolution, because you can't have consciousness and evolution if you don't have things like time and free will. So those things come in as an assumption. And as far as the end on the other end, it's just open-ended. It just keeps on working as far as I can see. So I can't see any end to it. And I could say, well, it'll go on forever, but I don't know that. I'm not sure what will happen. Maybe a particular PMR like this one may hit a dead end one day. And if it did, well, you could always start up another one, different rule set, different sorts of things. So even if that dead ends, it doesn't dead end the consciousness system. You see, even if our 7.5 billion people with free will run out of things to do, that doesn't make the system run out of things to do. So I just say that it tends to go on. It's open-ended. I don't see any end to it. I don't say that it's infinite. I don't say that it's not. It's just from our point of view, we can't see any further than it's open-ended, creates potentiality and new states to move into as it goes, and doesn't see, I mean, we can't see here from our viewpoint any end to it or any beginning to it, either one. So I think we pretty much agree on that. So infinity indeed is it's a concept. It's not a place. You don't ever get to infinity and say, so this is what infinity's like. Okay, here I am. I'm at infinity now. That's logically impossible. It can't exist as a place or a thing or a spot. It's just a concept.